All right. So today in the afternoon, Saturday afternoon, we have Ben Greenfield here. Super excited about this chat. He's the founder and CEO of Keon and also the host of the Ben Greenfield podcast. He's truly an amazing athlete, and he's on the leading edge of self-quantification, biohacking, health and wellness, and fitness. He's also a certified coach for Spartan SGX, and he's got a master's in physiology and biomechanics. And yeah, we're super happy to have you here, Ben. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks. But my office isn't as cool as your guys'.
Oh, I think it's way cooler, dude.
Shit littered around there.
Oh,
yeah,
I forgot
right
it.
now, it's like...
I forgot in the intro. He's also he makes his own spam, so he's got a special place in our heart.
Well, it's a synchro that he just made the spam too.
The can of spam on your table, along with your freaking sacred geometry poster or whatever that is, and the mold and the little Native American blanket and all sorts of stuff. It looks like a fun place.
We'll have to get you in studio sometime. We're only about 5 hours from Bonner, so.
Oh, yeah. I get really bored and want to go on a pretty long car ride. I'll jet across the border.
So you're joining us from your fitness studio, which is like you're walking on a treadmill right now, and this is how you do it, eh?
Actually, this is not my fitness studio. I just slapped the treadmill in front of my standing desk so I could walk while I make phone calls and do stuff like that. So yeah, I honestly, like any given day, I can usually walk like 3 to 5 miles while I'm just kind of dicking around at work. So it's kind of nice to be able to move during the day. But I have an actual gym out in the backyard with a bunch of stuff out there. I was out there this morning. My legs are sore because I was doing this weird workout. It's like electrical muscle stimulation, where you slap all these electrodes all over your legs and you jack this. It was designed in Russia. It's called Russian E-stim, and it uses like this DC current to just pull all the muscles your brain wouldn't normally be able to recruit to action. And it is super duper hard, and you can barely walk afterwards. So I did that this morning, and then I can also barely walk right now because I was telling you guys I made my kids carrot cake acai bowls for breakfast. And they're really good. It was like eating pumpkin pie for breakfast. And I put like macadamia nuts and dark chocolate and coconut flakes and all sorts of stuff on top of it, and made these wonderful acai bowls for them. But they only eat about half of them, so I also had a great big acai bowl, and then all my kids leftover acai bowls. So my legs are all jacked from the electrical muscle stimulation, and my stomach is like overflowing with carrots right now. So I feel pretty good.
Nice. We used to have a standing desk in the studio when we were in our old studio there. We had
when Graham was on his health kick, we had the standing desk and everything, but they got back on the wheat and we are sitting down again.
There you go. With spam.
With spam. There's probably wheat in this spam, I bet.
I usually figure out how to put wheat in something.
Yeah, exactly.
If not, you could buy some gluten powder and sprinkle it on there later.
I think I heard you talking about with one of your guests that it's like every 25 minutes you kind of switch things up a little bit. So it's like the important thing is not that sitting is so bad, but it's just that you're not doing anything for that long of a period of time.
Yeah, and they actually looked into this. They found that even people who exercise, like do their 1 hour of CrossFit or the health club or whatever at the beginning or the end of the day, they actually didn't see a significant reduction in most of the causes of mortality and cardiovascular risk if they were still sitting for 8 hours a day.
Right.
And so the idea is not that sitting is bad, but sitting for long periods of time can be detrimental to your blood glucose, specifically because standing upregulates your ability to be able to stabilize your blood glucose, and walking does it even more. But also because it shortens your hip flexors when you're sitting. And so when you shorten your hip flexors, what that does is it deactivates your glutes. And so when you shorten your hip flexors and deactivate your glutes, that's a fast track to low back and hip issues. So the trick is not to avoid sitting, but to have all sorts of different postures you can adopt during the day: sitting, kneeling, sitting cross-legged, in a lunging position, having like a different type of chair you could sit on. Like I've got one called a saddle chair. It kind of like splits your pelvis a little bit when you're sitting and forces you into a better posture. maybe a treadmill if you have room, you're able to slap one in there. And then like one of these desks that could preferably go from like sitting to standing. So you
Yeah.
can just kind of boogie all day long in different positions. And there's a biomechanist out of Seattle named Dr. Katie Bowman, who even has some uh, some research she's published in one of her last books. I forget the name of the book, but it kind of shows the the turbulence in different areas of blood vessels as they move through your body. And she even makes an argument in that book that sitting all day and then exercising could probably be worse for you than not exercising at all, because the blood, as it passes those areas of almost like kinked blood vessels that kind of they lose their elasticity as you're sitting all day long, could put you at higher risk for a heart attack if you're sitting all day and then going and just like crushing it at the gym.
Uh,
So yeah, the trick is not to not sit, but just to not sit for really long periods of time without breaks. And generally, I'll sit anytime I want to be in a little bit more of a parasympathetic state, like a rest and digest state, right? So I'll sit to eat, and I'll sit to chat with people, and like if I'm at a party, I'll lounge on the couch and sit with people. But anytime I'm working, I'm generally not sitting, with the only exception of that being I like to write fiction like at the end of the day. And I have like my special chair, like my set and setting in the living room where I'll go and bang out some fiction, just kind of sitting hunched over my computer.
right on. Yeah, you used to write as a kid, didn't you? A little bit. I was reading your bio beforehand as well, and I didn't know all of this even after listening to you for a few years. But it seemed like your life kind of switched around after in your early 20s, getting into becoming more of an athlete and studying all that stuff, as opposed to like the way you kind of grew up as a teenager.
Yeah, well, actually, it was more like when I was in my elementary years up until I was about 13, I was very much into fiction. My goal was to be a computer programmer and design video games. Like I was into fantasy fiction video games,
Right.
online World of Warcraft, and
Right. Yeah.
writing fiction and reading fiction. And then I got kind of carried away with sports, particularly tennis. And that's what kind of got me into physical culture and fitness and nutrition and physiology and all the stuff I wound up studying at university. But up until that point, yeah, I was pretty hardcore into like I read so much as a kid. I would just like my parents would have to force me out of my room and into the sunshine because I would just sit and read all day long. And I've kind of tapped back into that in my 30s. Um, I like to read fiction, and I wrote a fiction novel, a fantasy fiction novel last year. I'm about halfway through the sequel to that. And my goal is to have a 5-part fiction book series done by the time I'm 50 years old.
Oh,
So
nice.
that's what I'm banging away at.
Hopefully I hope you get there. I want to roll it back a bit. You made the comment about the sitting and the lower back and the shortened hip flexors. That's like I struggle with that problem. I spend a lot of time in a vehicle during the day and sometime at a desk, but I do get a lot of walking in there. But I definitely noticed that, especially like we just went to Colorado and back, and that was about, I think it was about 3,500 miles return trip and sightseeing and everything else. And I'm just wondering, what are some of the ways you can, if you're like, if you already have that problem with the lower back and the hip pain, and that probably is the result of that, what's some of the ways to roll that back?
Yeah, I kind of chunk it into two categories: one, mobility, and two, movement. So mobility means like if the hip flexors are shortened, and typically two other muscles that act technically they're hip flexors, but they kind of go all the way up into your abs, your psoas and your iliacus muscles. Those tend to be really shortened as well. Typically, the trick, first of all, from a mobility standpoint, is you get into all those muscles on the front of your hips, like starting up around where your quads attach into your hips and kind of moving all the way up into some of those parts around either side of your belly button. And you get in there with like a foam roller or a lacrosse ball, or there's a newer device that just came out last year. It's like this cheap ass looking piece of plastic. I think they sell it for like $40. They probably get it manufactured for like $2 in Taiwan or something, but it works. It's called a so right, PSO right, like psoas right, and you kind of lay your body over that, and it digs like perfectly into some of those areas that tend to get super short when you're in that seated position. And a lot of people they think my low back hurts, so I should like foam roll my low back or get a massage on my low back. But 9 times out of 10, the area you should be working is all the front, like from the sides of the belly button all the way on down to like the front of the quads. Like that's the area that tends to be shortened and adhesed. So you do that. And then also from a mobility standpoint, any like if you Googled like yoga hip flexor series or yoga hip opener series, like typically any of those kind of moves they do in yoga to free up the hips, like some of those lunges where you have your arms up in an overhead position while you're lunging, or some of the laying on the ground hip openers, those work really well if you're kind of mobilizing your psoas and your iliacus at the same time with deep tissue work. And then from a movement standpoint, you turn the glutes back on. And there's a lot of different moves you can do for your glutes, like squats and lunges and stuff like that. But uh, two of my favorites are, number one, you just get down in like a crawl position on the ground, like a quadruped position, like you're going to go bear crawl or something. And from that position, you just like kick your right leg out behind you as many times as you can, like 30 times. Then you reverse and you kick your left leg out behind you. Then you kick your right leg kind of out to the side and your left leg out to the side. So essentially, you're in like a bear crawl position, just like moving your legs. And you'll know you're doing it right because your glutes start to burn like hell. And that kind of trains your body how to turn glutes back on. The other one that I really like from a movement standpoint is there's this doctor that used to work with a bunch of the Tour de France cyclists who would have low back pain. He works with Lance Armstrong. He works with a bunch of pro athletes and surfers and stuff now, specifically on low back pain. And he like specializes in turning the glutes back on. His name is Dr. Eric Goodman. He has a book called True to Form. And that book, True to Form, it's got like 10 exercises in it that are super simple to learn and to memorize. And a lot of times, what I'll have people do, like clients that I'm coaching, I do this with myself as well, is I'll just kind of weave those 10 exercises in throughout the week. If I'm like taking a little break from work, or if I'm waiting for an airplane to take off and I'm at the gate or whatever, I don't really have any rhyme or reason. But those moves do a really good job turning on the glutes. So basically, that's what it comes down to: is you mobilize kind of the whole front area, and you do like some yoga hip openers and yoga hip moves, and then you also do something like those kickouts from a bear crawl position, and then also you grab a book like that True to Form book and learn some of those moves.
Awesome.
That makes a lot of sense, because you know what I've noticed lately is, you know how you get your shoulders get hunched in from life, and then when Lisa and I massage each other, we started doing some massaging on the inside here as well, and you get, it's, you know, it really makes a difference in bouncing those shoulders back.
Yeah, that's the thing. Like with the upper back and the shoulder posture, like a lot of people don't realize how tight their pec majors are. And I mean, if you ever had a massage therapist kind of work in that area under the clavicle and kind of around the inside crease of the shoulder, where the shoulder kind of attaches to your chest, like all that stuff tends to be super ropey and knotty and jumpy. And if you can get in there, I mean, you could do it yourself, but but the other one that I like to do for that area is, if you have a foam roller, you kind of put it underneath your back, like up around your upper back, and then just kind of lean back and you let your arms go like this. For anybody watching the video, I'm just kind of letting my arms kind of reach back behind me, and you press them into the floor as hard as you can like this, and just kind of opens up that whole area. But if you have the foam your back like a fulcrum, it allows you to really open up that area. And if you do that after you've gotten your pecs massaged, or after you've kind of massaged your own pecs with a foam roller or lacrosse ball or whatever, that can just like mobilize that whole area too.
Mine won't even reach the ground when I do it. I can't even get my elbows to the ground. That's terrible.
See, that should be your goal, should be to get the elbows to the ground. And if you can't, you can even stand against a wall and do that. Like you have your back touching the wall and your heels touching the wall. And then you put your arms back behind you like that. And you just try to get the backs of your hands touch the wall.
Yeah.
And then you just push against the wall as hard as you can for like 10 seconds, and it kind of opens up the shoulders.
I'll have to try that.
So we were talking about wheat a little bit, how they managed to sneak a little bit of wheat in everything. We've got some.
Do you say weed or wheat?
Wheat. Well, those are kind of opposite ends of the spectrum. Am I?
These days with CBD, they're putting that into everything too.
Yeah.
What's your take? Well, what's your take on that?
CBD.
Yeah.
I like it. I mean, not just CBD, but like CBN and CBG and all these other cannabinoids that they're isolating from the hemp plant. They all have specific properties like anti-inflammatory or anti-anxiety or anti-stress. Like, I think it's a huge joke that there's like grandmas getting arrested in airports for having CBD tinctures or CBD lotions that they're using on themselves when it's a completely harmless molecule. In the same airports where they're selling people booze,
Yeah.
which is killing and harming a lot more people than something like CBD. As a matter of fact, CBD is, I think, zero incidences ever of any type of toxicity or death related to it. But it's a molecule that really interacts, the endocannabinoid system with our endocrine system, with a lot of different anti-inflammatory pathways, with a lot of different neurotransmitter pathways related to relieving anxiety and stress. I take CBD every day. Like before I go to bed at night, I take 60 to 100 milligrams of CBD, and I sleep like a baby. And I measure my deep sleep cycles, and they're through the roof. And I don't do a lot of THC. I'll occasionally throw that in the mix, like if because I don't really like to drink alcohol much, right? So if I'm going to a party or something like that, like I'll just eat an edible or take a couple hits on a vape pen rather than drinking to excess. But THC is something I'll use in a situation like that. But CBD, man, I think it's a wonderful molecule. I think it's helping a lot of people out.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would agree with that. What about the other one, the wheat? Because we've
Yeah.
noticed in our family recently that, I mean, Lisa can't touch it, and it definitely looks like Cassandra's got some issues. So we actually met a guy in Colorado who deals with it in his family, and he's recommended some genetic tests you can get done for fairly cheap to see if you have a couple.
Yeah.
I'd have to look at the info to say exactly, but it's a couple of markers that you have, and they basically say you should be staying away from it. I'm just wondering. I'm assuming, if I remember correctly, I don't think you go too near wheat very often.
Well, it depends on the person. Like you're right that you can just go and get like a 23andMe test, for example, like a simple salivary analysis, and see if you carry specific SNPs that tend to be associated with celiac predisposition or an actual true medical inflammatory response to some of the gluten proteins that are specifically in wheat. Um, you can also get a really good food allergy panel that tests whether or not you have a true antibody response to wheat. There's a very good one. It's unfortunately not one of those type of tests you can order to your house like a genetic test, but it's one that a doctor would have to order for you. But I find a great deal of value in this test. It's a company called Cyrex, Cyrex, and they do a very comprehensive panel that shows whether or not you have any type of true sensitivities to gluten. And they also test what's called cross reactivity, meaning they'll test whether or not certain foods that you might consume along with wheat would render you more susceptible to the damage that could do to the gut, like coffee or corn or something like that. So they have a whole bunch of different. They call them arrays, like panels that they run. There's like 22 different panels. Some for mold, some for other allergies aside from wheat. But the one that I really like is they have one that's number 10, and the Cyrex panel 10 I think is like the gold standard to see whether or not your body could truly be able to handle gluten, or whether it might be something that's smart for you to avoid. But I think in most cases, wheat and gluten is kind of unfairly vilified. It's something that humans have been eating for thousands of years. Our guts have adapted pretty well to being able to digest a lot of the things that people call the natural built-in plant defense mechanisms that you'd find in wheat. Like the gluten or the phytic acids or things like that. I think the problem is a lot of people have compromised guts, right? And I think one of the biggest issues, and I think this is also why people who travel to Europe can handle more pasta and more bread and things like that when they're there than they can in America,
Yeah.
is because of glyphosate. Because glyphosate can, it essentially, activates a protein in the gut called zonulin, and can render the gut a little bit more permeable to things like gluten crossing the blood-gut barrier and causing an actual antibody response, right? An actual immune response to the consumption of gluten. And so I think consuming wheat from a crop that's been sprayed with glyphosate or any number of other different herbicides or pesticides is a bigger issue. And if you have access to like organic, non-GMO wheat, it's probably not going to be as big of an issue. And furthermore, we have evidence, that not just like quinoa, for example, like rinsing and soaking and even sprouting quinoa, or or fermenting and soaking lentils prior to cooking, doing a lot of things to deactivate the natural built-in defense mechanisms of a plant are something that our ancestors would have done. It's a natural way to actually prepare a plant. Just like whatever, walk out into a field of wheat and just like start to eat the stalks, or you're going to get a tummy ache. I mean, even animals know that. But in addition to that, the other thing is that a lot of people just don't prepare wheat in this ancestral way. And so what I mean by that is like I'll eat bread, but I'll eat, like, if I'm gonna have bread, I'll have sourdough bread, right? Because if sourdough bread has been fermented, that actually deactivates a lot of the phytic acids. It pre-digests a lot of the gluten. It even lowers the glycemic index of bread, so it's friendlier to your blood glucose levels. So for me, it all depends. If it's like a non-GMO organic crop, hasn't been sprayed with herbicides or pesticides or glyphosate, preferably has been fermented, then I think wheat is not that much of an issue,
Yeah.
especially in people who don't have compromised guts and they're not eating a crappy diet and they actually have the ability to be able to digest it.
So that's kind of like, I was actually talking to a fellow there a couple weeks ago, who I don't want to guess his name. John? Anyway, Jeff? I think it was a J. Anyway, he was talking about one of the ways, because white rice it turns into a sugar right away, if I understand that process correctly. But he was talking about how you can cook the rice, throw it in the fridge for a day or two, and it actually reverses that and turns it into a prebiotic.
Yeah, it basically makes the starch more resistant. Another example, like a resistant starch, would be like a green banana versus a ripe banana. Green bananas tend to simply be fed upon by the bacteria in your stomach, and the sugar is less digestible and absorbable by the human body, hence its name, resistant starch. Another example would be like acacia fiber or inulin, or many of these ingredients you'll now see in a lot of popular probiotics, because we know these are prebiotics. They'll feed the bacteria rather than feeding you. And when the bacteria are fed, they wind up producing another term is called postbiotics, which are beneficial compounds that are released when a bacteria consumes a prebiotic. Like a perfect example of that would be like another resistant starch kind of prebiotic is the skin of a pomegranate, right? And so a few of my favorite probiotics now, they're using pomegranate seed extract and pomegranate skin, blending that in with the probiotics. You got a prebiotic and a probiotic. And the postbiotic that's produced by a bacteria when that happens is called urolithin A. And urolithin A is actually one of the few compounds that is released by probiotics that can actually increase lifespan. It decreases the rate at which your telomeres shorten and has like this longevity enhancing effect. So it's kind of cool if you think about it. If you eat a diet that has some resistant starches in it, like green bananas or pomegranates, or like some of that rice that you prepare but then refrigerate and then eat after it's been cooled overnight, and you're including fermented foods or probiotics in your diet as well, not only is it fantastic for your gut, but it might even have kind of a life extending effect.
That's interesting. So I went about 4 months. Actually, are you there, Ben? I think you're a little frozen there. I've lost the connection.
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay, I went about 4.5 months off of most sugar, like most processed sugar and wheat. And then since our trip and we got back and I started eating a little bit, and then I played hockey, and I was so fucking sore after the hockey game. And I wondered if that's because I started eating wheat and sugar again.
Well, especially wheat that's like 4 hours from grain to bag,
yeah,
I think that's a huge problem, is the industrialization of it all.
Yeah, a lot of people do have like an inflammatory cytokine response to wheat, and that's why many people who have both rheumatoid arthritis and even some elements of osteoarthritis, they respond really well to kind of like more of a paleo protocol,
Oh,
where you eliminate a lot of modern grains that can cause that. Um, I also feel that, again, not to kick this horse to death, that a lot of those people could just benefit from making sure that their gut is taken care of, avoiding glyphosate sprayed crops, and
yeah.
if they were to eat meat, making sure it's prepared properly, like a slow fermented bread or something like that.
So friends of ours that are farmers, I mean, they use some pesticides, but they can't understand why people want to spray glyphosate pre-harvest. Like in Canada, they want to spray it all to dry it out right before harvest, but they don't seem to think glyphosate is the same issue if it's used properly prior, like as a pesticide.
Allen Brothers.
Do you have any thoughts on
Yeah,
that at all?
no, I have no clue. They could be
Yeah,
right. I
yeah,
mean, they probably know a lot more about farming than I do, but all I know is that if it is actually on the surface of the food that you're consuming, then it could be an issue.
yeah,
So
yeah,
yeah, it's the same thing with some of the GMO crops. Like they know that some of the genetic modification has been able to cause a great deal of damage to the guts of like rodents and insects and things like that. And there's not a lot of good studies in humans, but my protocol, I just play it safe.
yeah, yeah,
Just
totally.
if I can get my hands on something that hasn't been sprayed, I'd rather do that.
Yeah, 100%.
We got a question from the chats here. What is Ben's opinion on fitness trackers such as Fitbit, Apple Watch, and such? Are they worth the effort in using?
Yeah, they can be highly motivating. Like I wear an Aura ring to track what tracks like my steps, it tracks my sleep, it tracks my heart rate variability, which is kind of like your nervous system health, and I find it motivating. Like I I have found that I do a much better job like limiting my artificial light exposure at night, wearing blue light blocking glasses in the evening, and doing like some normal sleep hygiene stuff since I've done that. And it sounds stupid, but mostly just because I want to like have a good sleep score, like wake up and see my sleep score. And you'd think prior to having a ring like that or a tracker like that, I just want to do that just so I had better energy the next day. But I've found I'm even more motivated to do that because I'm kind of competitive with myself and I like to keep my sleep score up. For another example of that would be, like my blood glucose monitor. One of the main things I found with that is like if I eat on an airplane, because you're sitting on an airplane, back to the topic of sitting and, your blood glucose being less controllable when you're in a position. But when you're on an airplane, you're kind of screwed. You don't really have the option to stand. And I actually usually choose a window seat because I kind of like to sleep on airplanes. I can sleep better when I'm leaning my head against that wall that's by the window. So I'm trapped in there anyways. I can't get up and go to a bunch of fancy clown moves at the back of the plane that frequently. But I noted when I started wearing a blood glucose monitor, like one of the best ways to spike my blood glucose and keep it up for a long time was if I ate on a plane in a seated position. Even healthy food, right? Like my healthy energy bar or a handful of nuts and dark chocolate or whatever. So by wearing that blood glucose monitor on planes, I'm just far more likely to like order a soda water and have a soda water and chew some gum on the plane, right? Or another example would be I've found that like my sweet spot for activity with my tracker is about 15,000 steps a day. And if I get to the end of the day and I've got like whatever 14,000 steps, I'll go like walk to the mailbox and back after dinner. Like it's just highly motivating to have these trackers. And I think that the pros definitely outweigh the cons. I would say the only thing, and this is getting into the weeds a little bit, and some people consider this to be a little bit nitpicky, is I'm also pretty careful like how much I expose my body to Wi-Fi and to Bluetooth signals. I have my reservations about whether or not long-term exposure to high amounts of so-called dirty EMF is good for the body. And so, because I'm careful with that, I try to choose devices for self quantification that either only emit a Bluetooth signal, not a Wi Fi signal, and that preferably during a night of sleep, for example, could be placed into the equivalent of airplane mode,
Yeah.
right? Disable the Bluetooth signal, disable the Wi-Fi signal. And a lot of these devices don't have that option, right? And so that means that, let's say let's say you sleep like with your head kind of tucked up like this, and you've got one of those bracelets on, and it's emitting like a class 3 Bluetooth signal every 3 seconds looking for a device to talk to. Well, you've just basically got just like a transmitter next to your brain all night long.
Yeah.
And I'm concerned about the long-term effects of that. So I'd say if you are going to choose a tracking device, I like the ones that can be put in airplane mode. Or and especially you'd want to have your phone in airplane mode anyways if it's next to your bed at night. But that's my only thing with trackers. I like them all. I encourage people to find those where you could disable like Wi-Fi and Bluetooth and stuff like that, especially while you're sleeping.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I started doing airplane mode for sleeping, and it's made a big difference actually on my sleep and dreaming. Like I find like I dream more now on airplane mode. So I did want to pick your brain a little bit about testosterone and what you would say to, like, let's say parents of young boys, like boys, let's say like 8 to 13 or something like that, where, their doctors are now telling them that, your son is not producing any natural testosterone. And now they feel like they have to be on hormone replacement therapy, or I don't even know if that's the right term for it, but
Yeah.
on meds for life to create testosterone. Like, isn't there a bunch of natural things and some things that you would suggest that people do to do that?
Yeah. For any parent of a little boy, I think the best thing to do is just get testosterone and start injecting your kid's right butt cheek every day. It's like jam a needle up there and fill them full. Get them started early. No, I'm just kidding. With kids, and this is for both females and males, the bigger issue with kids is environmental estrogens, right? Like, what kind of shampoo are you using
Yeah.
with your kids, even your babies? Are you storing the food in the refrigerator in plastic? Are you microwaving stuff in styrofoam? Are you just like spraying household cleaning chemicals all over the house that have a lot of endocrine disruptors in them
Yeah.
and a lot of phytoestrogens in them? Because what'll happen there is you'll simply decrease the amount of androgen receptors that are available to testosterone and fill a young man's body or a young woman's body just chock full of estrogen. It's one of the reasons that we see, young females going through puberty at an earlier age. It's one of the reasons why we see young men experiencing symptoms of andropause at an early age, is because of phytoestrogens. And that's primarily a chemical type of issue. And there's a really good book about this by Dr. Anthony J called Estrogeneration that kind of gets into how we're kind of screwing our kids by not taking into account, what kind of soaps and shampoos they're using, what kind of chemicals we're using to clean our houses, what kind of things we're storing our food in, etc. So that's the big issue, and for adults, it can be other things. For example, we know that there are certain micronutrient deficiencies that can affect a man's ability to be able to produce testosterone, that are low hanging fruit, that don't involve, you need to go out and buy some, trendy Amazonian superfood to boost your testosterone levels. Like, examples of that would be zinc. A lot of guys are deficient in zinc. That affects testosterone. Creatine, which a lot of people think is just like a strength and power athlete supplement. Deficiency in creatine, that can also affect testosterone. Minerals, like using a lot of sea salts and using a lot of trace liquid minerals and things like that. Mineral depletion is another thing that's very, very important for testosterone. And so, as you can imagine, it's pretty easy to get your hands on like zinc, minerals, and creatine. And probably one final one I'd throw in there would be magnesium. And, a lot of times taking care of that low hanging fruit reduces the need to buy some crazy herb or start onto like a hormone replacement therapy. And then cortisol and stress are huge because, and I do a lot of consulting with people and look over their blood and their biomarkers. And I always see like this cluster of elevated cortisol, elevated sex hormone binding globulin,
Mm-hmm.
and pretty good total testosterone levels, but very low free bioactive testosterone levels. Because what happens is when you're stressed out, your body elevates the levels of sex hormone binding globulin, and that binds to sex hormones, as the name implies. And when you bind to total testosterone, you render less of it free and active and bioavailable because, frankly, your body, when cortisol is high and it's stressed out, it's like nature's response. It doesn't want a stressed out human who's like running from a lion or in a time of famine or whatever your body is interpreting that as from an evolutionary standpoint to go out and make babies, right? It doesn't want a human to bring babies into a stressed out environment. So it'll upregulate sex hormone binding globulin to decrease the free testosterone. Even if your brain is sending the signal to your testes just fine to make total testosterone, it's rendering that not bioavailable. So the trick there is, sleep well, de-stress, take care of cortisol levels, pick up something like a meditation practice or or a breath work practice or other ways to control stress, which a lot of guys, they'd rather just take out a needle and jab their right butt cheek or slash some testosterone cream on their scrotum. But I mean, I think there's a lot more low hanging fruit that you can go after. And then the last thing, and there's a lot of stuff you could do, but the last thing I would say from an exercise standpoint, like I've noticed a lot of guys will just do like whatever 40-minute slogs on the treadmill, or they'll do like a lot of endurance work or so-called chronic cardio, and a lot of that's not that great for testosterone levels. Your legs have a very high density of androgen receptors, and the body from a testosterone standpoint responds really well to things like heavy deadlifts, heavy squats, heavy strength training in general, but especially heavy strength training and high intensity interval training that involves the legs, where like sprints on the treadmill, quick sprints on the bike, squats, deadlifts, stuff like that. So if you take care of your cortisol and your stress, you take care of some of those micronutrients, and then a few times a week, you just like lift some heavy shit, especially with your legs, and throw in some good solid sprints, you can see a pretty good bump up in testosterone levels.
What about squatting without weights? Just squatting to squat. Like that's what I do for a warm up for ball
Yeah,
hockey. Instead of stretching now, I just do a bunch of squats and lunges and all that. Will that help?
yeah, yeah. Any movement with the legs
Yeah,
like
yeah,
that will
yeah.
help. I
As long
mean,
as
it's
it's not chronic cardio.
preferable, yeah, preferable to go to failure if you can. Um, with the body weight stuff, it can sometimes be hard to do that. Like,
Yeah,
a
yeah,
lot of guys can
yeah.
do like
A
50 or
hundred.
100 body weight
Yeah.
squats, and it really doesn't feel like they're getting that level. So the trick here, this is like a little hack I like, because I throw these things in my bag when I travel. You can buy them on Amazon, but they're called blood flow restriction straps. They've got some really good research behind them for being able to build muscle and increase growth hormone, even in the absence of heavy weights. And they're literally like tourniquets that you wrap around your arms or you wrap around your legs prior to like a pull up, push up, squat, body weight exercise session. And you'll get like 20 reps into a body weight squat set, and your legs are burning like hell, like you have a 300-pound barbell on your back. And it's very simple. You're essentially just like restricting blood flow. And it's a cool way to feel like you're lifting really heavy weights, even if you're just doing like body weight only training. They're called blood flow restriction straps.
Awesome.
Is there any dietary tips for reducing cortisol?
Um, there are some herbs that can help. Some of the more notable ones would be like reishi mushroom extract. Ashwagandha is another. There's a supplement called phosphatidylserine that's very, very effective at lowering cortisol levels. Um, Cortisol is something that is elevated in response to inflammation. And two of the best ways to increase inflammation would be high amounts of processed sugar consumption and high amounts of vegetable oil consumption. So if you can, from one end, consume some herbs or some compounds that help to regulate cortisol, like ashwagandha or reishi or phosphatidylserine, and then at the same time limit processed sugars and limit vegetable oils, you'd be covering a lot of your bases in terms of dietary control of cortisol.
Cool. So I got a pretty complicated question here from my buddy Mike, who's been following your work, and he's a fellow biohacker enthusiast and all that. So if you have any questions about the question, I probably won't be able to answer, but I'm going to give this a shot. So he read a recent paper showing that senescent cells hyperaccumulate iron, and he noticed that cancer cells have the same feature, and this is one of the reasons that high dose IV vitamin C and the anti-malarial artemisinin are being studied as anti-cancer therapies. So they selectively oxidize cancer cells by reacting with the high iron levels. And do you think these could work as senolytics as well?
Yeah, they potentially could, because iron, which I used to think was this, as an endurance athlete,
Yeah.
racing triathlon and stuff, I used to always look at my hemoglobin, my hematocrit, my iron, my ferritin, and I'd be thinking, well, if it's high, that must be good because iron is one of the ways that my hemoglobin is carrying oxygen to deliver it to tissue. But it turns out that excess iron, which a lot of guys actually have an issue with, is called hemochromatosis. That's actually an oxidant. It almost acts like a rusting molecule within the human body and can result in the formation of what are called peroxide radicals, which is essentially like hydrogen peroxide type of compounds within the body that can cause damage to tissue and also play a role in the development of senescent cells that can lead to accelerated aging or the growth of cancerous cells or angiogenesis to cancerous cells, or that would be like feeding of new blood vessels to cancerous cells. So the idea would be if you can limit or lower iron, we know that one of the worst things to do if you're taking an iron supplement is to take it with a vitamin C supplement because vitamin C will limit the absorption of the iron. We know the same thing could be said for, say, like, things that have phytic acid in them, like grains would not be something you'd consume with an iron supplement. But if you can figure out ways to decrease your iron, it could be a longevity enhancing mechanism and also an anti-cancer mechanism. In my opinion, even though there are a whole bunch of companies selling iron binders and iron detoxification protocols, if a guy has elevated iron and elevated ferritin, I think going out and giving blood is the best way to reduce that.
Huh.
And it's cool because you're also doing humankind a service, right?
Yeah.
Like, you're providing good blood, and then you're also lowering your iron levels by providing blood. And it's also why men have a bigger issue with hemochromatosis or high iron compared to women, because any woman who's not postmenopausal is a lot of times bleeding every month, and guys, unless we're like heavy endurance athletes that have a high red blood cell turnover, or say maybe you could say like an MMA fighter or warrior or somebody who might be wounded a lot, we're not bleeding that much. So the idea would be you give blood as almost like a life extending and cancer controlling strategy. So
Huh.
yeah, there is something to that thought pattern.
Yeah, interesting. So are we close to, or maybe we're even there, but I'm not aware of it, of like a full genetic sort of panel and analysis on like ancestral diet potential and exercise regime kind of stuff? Like, I've heard you talk about it a little bit on the show, but are we at the point where we could send, like, let's say our blood in somewhere and get like a full blown sort of,
Yeah.
analysis to help with that? It's like diet is so specialized, and you've got all this keto versus vegan stuff, and like, I'm trying different things myself, and it's just hard to figure out what really does work best. Like, it's hard to analyze that on yourself.
Yeah. Well, from a genetic standpoint, yes, that's a simple, and this technology has existed, with not just 23andMe, but Ancestry and some of these other websites. Being able to trace your ancestry is very simple. That's a simple salivary protocol. And a lot of times these salivary protocols also show you some things like we were talking about earlier, like predisposition to celiac disease, or how well a job your body does handling caffeine, or how well a job your body does handling saturated fats.
Yeah.
And so if you're looking at not only where you came from, and then it's pretty easy via a little bit of Googling to see what those areas have eaten for thousands of years. And then you kind of fill in the gaps by saying, okay, do I have any genetic predispositions? Like, even though maybe I come from a Northern European ancestry, and I know that butter and lard and things like that were part of that diet, maybe I also carry the gene that dictates that I have a little bit of a deleterious response to saturated fats, the ApoE34 or ApoE44 variant. Well, I'm going to eat a diet that is rich in meats and fish and tubers and like salted and fermented foods, and a lot of these things my Northern European ancestors would have eaten, but I'm going to limit the butter and the lard to no more than about 10% of my total dietary intake. And then you could take that one step further and say, okay, I'm also going to get, say, like one of these Cyrex food allergy panels I was talking about earlier.
Yeah.
And maybe it turns out that the green beans and the pumpkins my Northern European ancestors would have eaten, and maybe one variant of fish, like let's say salmon, my body actually is allergic to. For some reason, I produce an antibody response to those. So yeah, I'm going to follow that diet that my ancestors ate, but I'm not only going to limit the saturated fats because of what I found out about my genetics, but I'm going to limit my intake of salmon and green beans and pumpkin too. And then finally, you could get a blood test and you could see, okay, in addition to that, turns out from my blood test, I'm low in vitamin D, I'm low in magnesium, and I'm low in vitamin B12. So I'm going to eat what my Northern European ancestors ate. I'm going to limit my saturated fats, not going to do the green beans, the salmon, and the pumpkin. And then the supplements that I take are going to be vitamin D, magnesium, and a vitamin B12 complex. Right. And then boom, you've all of a sudden got a pretty good idea of how to customize your diet. And frankly, it's not like rocket science. It's pretty easy to get these tests, look at them, see what am I low in or what am I genetically predisposed to not do well with, what my ancestors eat, boom, done. And then you know whether or not that ketogenic or carnivore or vegan diet that your neighbor is eating that helped them lose 20 pounds is good for them, but not good for you.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Hey, can you talk about what you're doing instead of the young blood transfer type thing, like sending your blood somewhere else?
Oh, yeah.
That's okay. It's pretty interesting.
Yeah, that young blood transfer is nuts. Like I interviewed those people from the Young Blood Institute.
Yeah.
I was blown away. They were showing me pictures of the blood bags from like these Alzheimer's patients and Parkinson's patients where they were taking their plasma out and it looked like freaking like nasty ass oatmeal. And after like 10 treatments of recycling their plasma with that from a young, healthy donor, their plasma was just like clear and pristine and the Alzheimer's symptoms were going away. I mean, literally, like almost like reversal or curing of a disease.
Wow.
Unfortunately, that's like a $50,000 protocol to go down to the Bay Area and do something like that. So
plus, it's also a bit creepy too. I mean,
I can't say there's a good replacement for that. I mean,
you can't or you can.
Yeah, I can't. I mean,
I thought you were sending your own blood somewhere and getting it reworked to get the stem cells out of there, and then.
Oh yeah, I could tell you what that is in a second. But you could say that like giving blood could help. Doing the sauna frequently because when you're turning over a lot of sweat, you're turning over a lot of blood. Exercising, just like doing a lot of these things that just kind of recycles your blood normally.
Yeah.
But what I did was I did do one. I have done two protocols that kind of sort of involved like modifying my blood.
Mm-hmm.
One was that I went to New York City and I had a pint of my blood taken out and then stressed overnight, like in this case, stressed with cold. And when blood gets stressed, it just dumps, the red blood cells dump a whole bunch of stem cells called adult pluripotent stem cells into the system. And they're like these embryonic like cells that essentially make like young blood. And then you wake up the next day and you go back into the doc and they re-inject that back into your body. And then the other protocol I've done that's kind of similar, and there's another doctor down in South Carolina that does this one, is he'll take your blood out and he'll take about a pint of blood or so and concentrate that with ozone, which is a really, really potent antioxidant, and then inject the ozone back into your body, but it's mixed already with your own blood. So there are some protocols that kind of sort of fall into the same camp, but it's not like you're actually getting the blood from a young, healthy donor injected into your body. But yeah, I mean, doing things like, umbilical stem cells or placental stem cells or amniotic fluid stem cells, that really is, something from a young, healthy baby going into your system. So it is kind of sort of similar.
Yeah.
Just, it's not quite as intensive as what they're doing at that Young Blood Institute.
Yeah.
Is that like what they're doing with the root canals too?
I think it's similar. Yeah. They take blood out when they do root canals up here. There's a naturopathic dentist that puts the blood into a centrifuge and then pulls out the white blood cells and the stem cells and pops the gel back in the hole to help it heal.
Yeah, it's like a platelet-rich plasma. Yeah. Also, that's probably mixed with stem cells. Yeah.
So why is there not a lot of NAD plus IV anymore? Like I've heard like years ago, I think I heard you talk about that, and like we've got some vitamin IVs down the road and stuff like that, and people doing some of those protocols. But how come we don't hear a lot about that anymore?
Well, they're expensive and they're uncomfortable, right? And even though they're the best way to boost the levels of NAD, very, very good mitochondrial protectant that declines remarkably as you age. You have like 90% NAD loss by the time you're in your mid 70s. The idea is you kind of top off and replace those NAD levels. Fasting can help to increase NAD. The intake of fermented foods can help to increase NAD. Exercise can help. Sauna can help. But when it comes to actual supplementation with NAD, mainlining it via the bloodstream in an IV
Yeah.
is the best way to increase your levels of bioavailable NAD.
Yeah.
But as these supplement companies have arisen that are selling either NR
Yeah.
or
Nicotinamide
NMN,
riboside. Yeah.
yeah, or even sublingual NAD. Most of these NR bypasses the first pass by the liver, so you could take that as a capsule,
Yeah.
and it's going to result in some bioavailable NAD. If you take NMN or NAD in supplemental form, usually it's in a form that's kind of dissolved under the tongue, so that it bypasses liver metabolism. And they're less expensive than IVs. They're obviously more comfortable than IVs because you tend to get like some burning and some nausea when you get the NAD injected, but they're not as efficacious. However, they're far more available to the general population and far more affordable. And then, kind of in the middle, are these NAD patches. A lot of people don't know about these, but you can get NAD delivered via the skin in an NAD patch. And I kind of opt, so I'll get an NAD IV about once a month.
Oh, wow.
And then what I do is I put on one of those patches about once a week, and that gives me about 500 milligrams of NAD that, again, bypasses all the digestion and everything, and then bypasses any issues with oral bioavailability. And I dick around every once in a while, because all these companies are always sending me supplements. So I think upstairs in my pantry right now, I've got sublingual NAD and like an NMN sublingual powder, and then I think I have the True Niagen capsules up there too. So I've
Yeah.
got other things I can kind of mess around with. But ultimately, my protocol right now is I like to get an IV about once a month, and then do one of those patches about once a week.
Okay, that's interesting. Yeah, I mean, even the NR is pretty expensive as far as a supplement goes. I think it's probably, if
Oh
you're going
yeah,
to do the right, a couple capsules a day, it's like 40, $50 a month, I think. So,
yeah. That's why
yeah,
I think everybody should cover their bases. Move, do the
yeah,
sauna,
yeah,
eat some fermented foods, work in some fasting, and
yeah.
yeah.
So I also want to mention before I forget that most of the stuff you've talked about, you've got episodes with leading experts in the world on all this stuff. I mean, you talked about the estrogenic thing is one of your it's a great podcast on your website, and then there's a whole bunch of other stuff. I mean, and the one thing I wanted to mention is that was really relieving for me, and when I started listening to you years ago and getting into sort of more of this health and wellness and sort of biohacking thing, I mean, I was really surprised at how open you and some of your colleagues were to alternative healing and therapies, and whether it's just meditation. I mean, it was really refreshing to hear that you guys, you follow the science a lot on all this stuff, and you're always looking at the reports and the science, but you're also very open to a lot of the stuff that can't be measured so easily by science.
Yeah, I mean that's the way that it kind of always has been when it comes to affecting change, but being ahead of what might be accepted in
Yeah.
mainstream medicine. What was it? Semmelweis was the doctor who was literally like vilified and sent off to a mental institution when he raised the idea that surgeons should perhaps be washing their hands as they're going back and forth from like operating on somebody to doing a C-section on a mom. And people are just like, this dude's a kook. What's he talking about? Like, wash your hands. It's inconvenient. It doesn't work. He was a young doctor. His lab coat wasn't as long as the other doctors, which is how they kind of judged the intelligence and superiority of a physician back in those days. And he wound up dying in prison, or like in a mental institution, for suggesting that folks wash their hands prior to surgery, right? And now that's just common practice. So yeah, I think you if you stick only to the stuff that's just like completely tried and true with a decade of human clinical research behind it, you do kind of limit yourself as far as generating some interesting ideas that are more based on case studies or anecdotal data. And I'm not closed to that idea. I mean, I'm not even close to ideas that are completely rooted at this point, in things that simply can't be proven, like a lot of the stuff that folks like Bruce Lipton or Joe Dispenza talk
Yeah. Yeah.
about, like
Yeah.
the fact that the cells and the tissues can respond to emotions or thoughts or belief patterns, or that perhaps things like bone cancer could be rooted in hate or anger or bitterness. Like, none of that shit's provable. But you know, I mean, hell, I'm a Christian, right? Like, I believe that God made the planet like 12,000 years ago. It doesn't get much more kooky faith-based than that. So I'm kind of, I'm kind of open to a lot of ideas that are even just based purely on, well, this is just something that we know. We can't quite explain it, but we know that people who are full of hate and bitterness and rage and anger tend to have this higher incidence of bone cancer. So there's something between like the emotion and the cancer. But yeah, I mean, I'm not close to ideas that can't necessarily be proven, at least at this point in
Yeah.
science.
Well, a couple of my favorite shows that you did were with these like chi pushers, like Shaolin monks from it's just right out of a movie, these guys that went up there, forced their way, and not forced, but, insisted that they go in and study with these guys, and then they come out just pushing huge amounts of chi. And I mean, it's like just straight out of like a fantasy movie. Unbelievable episodes with those guys.
Yeah, but perfect example. I mean, like anybody who's done holotropic breath work,
Yeah.
About once a month, I do this long holotropic breath work session in my sauna. My pineal gland just like churns out DMT. I get to the same point with that as I do with like high dose psilocybin. And like we know that the body and the breath and the emotions can produce some pretty impressive chemical changes on not just us, but based on the electrical signals that the human body produces, those around us. So yeah, a lot of this stuff kind of flies under the radar and is scoffed at by mainstream medicine and mainstream science. But I still think that just because that's the case, we can't or shouldn't feel as though we need to ignore it or not dabble in it or find some interesting tidbits of goodness and benefit from it.
That's great. I think that's a really healthy attitude.
That's like the placebo, it's like I say, it's all just different variations of the placebo effect. That is just an annoyance to the medical system.
Even though they use it as a measurement.
I mean, if I were to convince you that spam that's on your desk was going to increase your IQ, and I gave you a pre and post cognitive function test or cognitive intelligence test, I guarantee you do better on a post test after you ate the spam.
This is what we tell people
I don't think pork and meat do shit for that.
We try and tell people that if they support the show, that they'll just feel better. Life will just be better.
Listen to the Grimerica show and you'll be smarter and healthier.
Yeah. So before we run out of time here, why don't you tell people about what what you do and your Keon company and your podcast, and just get a chance to give people the rundown there, because it's amazing work, and really appreciate all you do.
Thanks for giving me the opportunity. I got a podcast and a blog at bengreenfieldfitness.com. Try to interview some physicians and scientists and talk about interesting stuff, primarily in the realm of like life extension and health and performance and fat loss, nutrition, supplementation, things like that. And then I also own and operate a supplements company where I formulate, supplement formulations for things like joint health or fat loss or muscle gain, et cetera. And then the name of that company is Keon. And so that's at getkeon.com, KION.com. So those are kind of my two companies, are bengreenfieldfitness.com and getkeon.com. And that's it.
Well, you're also a guinea pig on your own stuff too. I mean, I love the way you try everything out yourself as well. Really appreciate that.
Yeah, for sure. Not dead yet, so it hasn't blown up in my face too bad.
That's right. Any regrets with that self-prescribed stuff at all?
No, I wish I had some sexy story where I really fucked myself up. But honestly, like anything I've messed around with has always made me feel better. I mean, even freaking, I got a bunch of, like publicity last year for injecting stem cells into my dick, and people are like, oh, you're gonna get dick cancer, your dick's gonna turn black and fall off. But honestly, like my erections got better and my orgasms like doubled in length and my libido went up, and yeah, sure, shit could have gone wrong, but it all went pretty well. So
Nice.
so far nothing's gone wrong.
Right on.
Is a holotropic breath work, is that similar to like what Wim Hof is doing?
Yeah, that's similar to what we were doing there. We were just
it'd be
away
like
in
doing
Colorado.
Wim Hof breathing.
Yeah.
But it'd be like doing it for like 90 minutes.
Right. Okay. Yeah, we just went through that with one of Wim Hof's certified trainers. We were doing it every morning when we were at a little getaway there in Colorado. It was fantastic.
Nice.
Yeah.
Dig it.
Right on, Ben. Is there anything else you want to mention before we let you go?
I think that's it, dudes. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
Thanks for your help, man. It's awesome
it's been
chatting
great.
with you. Yeah.
Cool.
Thanks so much.
Cool.
All right, buddy.
All right.
Okay. See
Catch
ya.
you guys later.
Okay, take care.
All right. Enjoy the rest of the day. Got the mouse there. That was a chat. One and only Ben Greenfield. Greenfield. So that's exciting. I mean, we were driving. Was it when we were driving to Minneapolis?
It was CAC. No, it was CAC number 2 when we were
Wasn't it
tweeting.
CAC number 1?
No. Oh, yeah, it was. It was 2 years ago then. Yeah.
I thought it was even pre-CAC. I thought it was when we went down to visit Brad in Spokane.
Yeah, it might have been.
That's when we were listening to him talk to Rick Ross or whatever, right?
Yeah, yeah. It's really his podcast is overwhelming with the information. It's really, you kind of got to pick what you want out of it, because you could just get overwhelmed with all the health and wellness tips and all that. And you were tweeting him, and I was actually looking for supplement stores in Spokane, I think.
Yeah,
that's
right.
Right near there.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's when I was looking for the NR, the nicotinamide riboside.
That was before he blew up.
Before what?
That was before he blew up. Because
No,
I think he
no,
tweeted us back some stories,
No.
didn't he?
No, he was blown up
Was he?
before then. Yeah. Yeah, for quite a few years now. He's a super athlete too. He just won this competition. I think it was a bow hunting competition or something like that. Is that what he said?
Bonners.
Yeah, close to
Bonners Ferry. That's one of my favorite portals into the USA.
The thing I like about it is he's not just a true athlete, but he practices what he preaches, and he tries shit on himself, and he's super smart. You wonder how he retains all this information. It's fantastic.
Absolutely. Well, huge thanks to Ben for coming on the show.
Inspiring.
Yeah, inspiring. Check out his Twitter account at Ben Greenfield. Greenfield.
Problem with that today.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know. Is
there
even
wearing
a
those
Greenfield?
shades in the studio? Is that why?
It's sunny.
Outside.
I don't know.
We didn't even get a chance to talk to him about
Greenfield?
sun and light, and I wanted to ask him all these other questions too, but
He's a busy guy, but that's okay. Now that we broke the ice, we'll be able to have him back on again, I'm sure.
Maybe.
We'll have him on down the road. We can get into the photons and the brotons. Big thanks to people who support the show. Check out grimerica.ca/support so you can live longer, feel better, and just have a general lightness about you. And we would really appreciate it. You can join the ranks of the people that pay for all the bandwidth and the table and the mics, all that fantastic stuff.
Cords that go all the time.
Cords that are constantly breaking, all that fantastic stuff. Boost your karma, grimerica.ca/support. There's a bunch of stuff in the show notes that's super helpful. Graham takes the time to do the show notes, and he has all the links in there. You can just go there, click on them, do it.
On most of the stuff we talked about too. Like tonight's episode, we have he mentioned a few books and a few things in there, so I'll put links into those books. So if people want to find out what it is, because I know what it's like when you're listening to something and you can't take notes about highlighted
Absolutely.
topics, just go into the notes, click on it, and you get a link to the book.
Yeah, while you're there, review the show, share the show, tell your friends about this motherfucker, sign people up for the newsletter. What else? Is that it?
Sure.
That's it. All right, guys. Thanks for listening, and we will see you next week.
Say goodbye to the live people.
Yes, we'll be back. In,
Are we
I
going
talked to
live?
yeah.
You talked to Sherman?
Yeah, talk to
you
Schumer.
doing
He's going to
down
start
there, your niece?
early again, but he can't do video because he's sick. But we'll go live. We'll just put up a picture of him.
Okay.
So we'll be back in about 20 minutes with Michael Shermer. Live stream seemed to go okay. That's a good.